Presidential underdogs look to make up ground on Trump and Clinton in Wisconsin. Republican Ted Cruz and Democrat Bernie Sanders are hoping to turn the tables on their party's frontrunners in the Wisconsin U.S. presidential primary and reinvigorate their campaigns for the White House. But even if they win in the Midwestern battleground state, Mr. Cruz and Mr. Sanders would still face tough mathematical odds of winning their party's nominations before the summer conventions. However, losses for leading contenders Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton would keep an element of uncertainty hanging over both races. Mr. Sanders has vowed to stay in the Democratic contest through all of the voting contests, and the Vermont senator has raised enough money to make good on that pledge. A win in Wisconsin would be a boost for his campaign, but would still leave him trailing Mrs. Clinton in the delegate count. The Republicans are braced for a real convention fight, which could occur if Donald Trump cannot reach the 1,237 delegates needed to clinch the nomination through the normal voting process. Mr. Cruz, the ultra-conservative first-term Texas senator who has emerged as Trump's closest rival, is casting Wisconsin as crucial to Republican efforts to stop the billionaire businessman. What we are seeing in Wisconsin is the unity of the Republican Party manifesting, Mr. Cruz said, during one of his final campaign stops for Donald Trump. The long lead-up to Wisconsin's contest has included one of the worst stretches of his candidacy. He was embroiled in a spat involving Ted Cruz's wife, which he now says he regrets was sidetracked by his campaign manager's legal problems after an altercation with a female reporter, and stumbled awkwardly in comments about abortion. However, Mr. Trump made a spirited final push in Wisconsin and predicted a really big victory. "If we do well here, it's over," he said. "If we don't win here, it's not over." Republican voters in Wisconsin were deeply troubled by the direction of the U.S. economy, with more than 90% saying they were either very or somewhat worried. Republican voters also held negative views on the consequences of trade, with more than half saying it has an adverse effect on jobs in the U.S., according to exit polls. Complicating the primary landscape for both Cruz and Trump is the continuing candidacy of John Kasich. The Ohio governor's only victory has come in his home state, but he is still picking up delegates that would otherwise have helped Mr. Trump inch closer to the nomination or help Mr. Cruz catch up. Donald Trump has grown increasingly frustrated with the governor and has joined Ted Cruz in calling for Mr. Kasich to end his campaign. Mr. Kasich said Mr. Trump's focus on him is a sign that he is best positioned to win over the businessman's supporters. If Mr. Cruz wins all of Wisconsin's 42 delegates, Donald Trump would need to win 57% of those remaining to clinch the Republican nomination before the July convention. So far, Mr. Trump has won 48% of the delegates awarded. Heading into Wisconsin, Trump has 737 delegates to Cruz's 475, with Kasich trailing with 143. Among Democrats, Hillary Clinton has 1,243 delegates to Mr. Sanders' 980 based on primaries and caucuses. When including superdelegates, the party officials who can back any candidate, Mrs. Clinton holds a much wider lead, 1,712 to Sanders' 1,011. It takes 2,383 delegates to win the Democratic nomination. Mr. Sanders, a self-declared Democratic socialist, has taken his dark horse candidacy from a mere annoyance to Mrs. Clinton to a serious challenge for the former Secretary of State, who had largely been expected to take the Democrat nomination at a canter when the contest began last year. On the eve of voting in Wisconsin, Mrs. Clinton's campaign manager argued that Bernie Sanders' only path to victory relies on overturning the will of the voters. In a memo to supporters, Robbie Mook wrote that the Sanders strategy now is a combination of trying to flip pledged delegates at state and county conventions, while also convincing superdelegates that he deserves their support. Mr. Sanders would need to win 67% of the remaining delegates and uncommitted superdelegates to catch up with Mrs. Clinton. So far, He is winning 37%. Even if Mr. Sanders wins in Wisconsin, he's unlikely to gain much ground, because Democrats award delegates proportionally. A narrow victory by either candidate would mean that both Sanders and Clinton would get a similar number of delegates. Donald Trump has won some of his strength among Americans who believe Hispanic immigrants are taking away their jobs. He has vowed to build a wall along the border with Mexico and bragged he would make the Mexican government pay for it. In a published report, Mr. Trump is now saying he would cut off billions of dollars in remittances by immigrants living in the U.S. and use that to pay for construction of the 1,000-mile wall. The report, in Tuesday's Washington Post, cites a two-page memo sent by the Republican presidential frontrunner threatening to change a rule under the Patriot Act anti-terrorism law to cut off money transfers sent to Mexico. Mr. Trump added that he would withdraw the threat if Mexico makes a one-time payment of $5–10 billion, £3.50–7 billion, to finance the wall. However, U.S. President Barack Obama dismissed the Trump proposal. "Good luck with that," Mr. Obama said in a press briefing, citing the dangers of what he described as half-baked notions.